and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. It is the first week of October of 2024. We are in the heat of the elections. Now, although we talk about politics on this show, we also our main focus is the law. That's what makes our program different, is we are going to focus on the legal issues and bring some politics along in the end as part of it. So our biggest focus today, we've got 4. So our first is going to be Diddy. We got to go back to Diddy. We did an episode previously. Our one before this one was about Diddy, specifically what he's been charged with, what the indictment is alleging. We break that down for you. But this one, we're going to discuss bond. Why is he being held without bond? Why has he had a couple of hearings? What's up with the appeal? And will he ever get out? So we're going to address the bond issue because a lot of people don't fully understand that. And it's even confusing to me as an attorney of 19 years. We're next going to talk about the execution. In the past couple of weeks, there's an execution in Missouri. We're going to take that up. Normally, not everybody loves, and the majority of America, I think, in the polling is headed toward being anti-capital punishment, but there are still some states who do capital punishment. But this one in particular has an extra legal issue or two, and practical issue is it appears that this particular one, there were a lot of cries for, let's not execute him. Please don't execute this man, even from the prosecution. So we're going to break down that story, what the cries were for, why they were made, and why they weren't heard and acted upon. So we're going to break that down. We're also going to go back to Jack Smith. This is a continuing theme. We are covering all of the Trump cases and trials. This particular one is the D.C. case, the election interference case. Jack Smith is the special prosecutor on the case. Judge Chutkan is the sitting judge. We've got issues of what information is going to be given to the public before the election. We're 1 month away. So what, if anything, is going to come out? What can come out? Is there anything Trump can do to prevent it? And then we're going to wrap up with some election updates, including the vice presidential debate that just happened this past week, as well as a couple other smatterings in there. Whew. So stay tuned. If you don't like one topic, skip ahead to the other topic. We hope that you enjoy the whole show, but that's what we're going to cover on this show. I'm Virginia Tarani. I'm the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which is the program that hosts the Legal Weekly Wine. We offer supplemental bar classes for law students, and we also offer a lot of other, 8 core subjects for law students and even undergrads, including evidence reviews, criminal law, criminal procedure, the 8 core subjects, and we offer some fun merchandise. We have some great shirts and some coffee tumblers out there with some funny legal sayings. So if you like those things, like allegedly this is coffee, I'm coffee related, so I plead the 5th cup of coffee, that sort of thing. Check out our merch page at thelawunscripted.com. And I think it's like /merch, but thelawunscripted.com gets you into our bar program, gets you into the merch, gets you into our 2 podcasts. So this podcast and the Law Unscripted podcast. Find us on there. I'm also the owner of Tarani Law LLC. We are a law firm operating in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, and we focus mostly on personal injury law. I am joined today by 2 co-hosts, our very own Chelsea Rogers, who is our co-producer of The Law Unscripted and all of its facets, as well as my colleague in Tarani Law LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. And our lawyer, Chelsea, it's good to have you here. I want you to say hello. And then what I want you to do is, everyone who hasn't joined the show, Chelsea is our Georgia peach. She is from Georgia. This is her home state. We love that this is her. And this past week, we've had the hurricane that's blown through the East Coast. And we want to make sure you're okay. Clearly you're on, so you seem to at least be physically okay. But we'd love to hear about what's happening in your hometown, in your area, and as a result of this flooding. But hello.
Hi, glad to be here. Yes, I'm here and I am well. It was more of a scare for where I am at. The projections were that it was going to hit and it was going to hit hard. And at the last minute, it sort of redirected the storm. So despite the fear in this area, it ended up being mostly fine. But, obviously, when you look at the damage that's been done, North Carolina specifically,
Yeah.
um, it's really scary to think that that could have been here if it hadn't changed past. And so my thoughts are with them because they were just, that's not a coastal town that's really equipped or prepped for this kind of
Right.
natural disaster. And so did some damage.
Yeah.
East Tennessee took a lot of damage too.
Yeah.
Thanks for adding that. And Dr. Vile, let's head to you on this. Dr. Vile is our other co-host of the Law Unscripted, who joins us. He's our regular co-host on the Legal Weekly Wine, and also joined us with some of the bar prep for the Law Unscripted. You're a regular contributor to us, and you do live in Tennessee, so you're a Tennessee counterpart. I believe you're in the middle of Tennessee. Did you get
Absolutely.
any effect, and what did happen to East Tennessee?
We got a little bit more rain than usual, but East Tennessee is really very badly. I mean, I'm not, there are some towns that would be equivalent, I think, to Asheville in North Carolina. Again, if you see the Tennessee flag, for people who don't know, there are three stars in it, east, middle, and west. And they're historically and geographically fairly different. But East Tennessee this time took the brunt of it. And again, mountains and valleys. You tend to get a lot more flooding, bridges out, rivers swollen in areas like that.
Yeah, a lot of the Gatlinburg area hit.
Yes.
They're comparing it to Katrina, to a disaster in the same amount as Katrina and the same devastating effects. I believe approximately 100 people already have been declared dead as a result.
A lot more than that.
Is it more now?
Closer, I think, now to 180 or whatever. What's fascinating about this storm is, you typically worry most about where it's going to hit, and it hit, I believe, as a Category 4, which really high winds. But maybe in part because they're a little bit better prepared in that area for this, but largely because the primary damage was not, I think, so much the wind as it was the rain.
Yeah, the
And the
amount of
flooding that
rain and how
accompanied.
quickly, right.
I mean, people were, it was almost apocalyptic,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that gets into, I don't want to go too much into the politics, especially at this part of the program, but that gets into a lot of questions throughout the country of, is this a part of climate change? Is that what we're seeing? Is this just normal, normal sets of stuff? It just hasn't been recorded as much in history, or we're not focusing on the prior history. And that's some of what the debates were about last night, is in pieces of it is, is it there climate change or is there not? And are these indicative? So, research, do something, go out and look, research for yourselves, see what you think.
May I tell a story I was looking at?
Please.
I had interviewed years ago at Appalachian State, which is in Boone, North Carolina. Very, very beautiful place. It was I don't know, the university was closed for 3 or 4 days, but the town was very similar to Asheville, as far as I can tell, a lot of devastation. But I was looking at the calendar, and one of the things for Wednesday of this week was it was either a conference or a presentation on how to prepare for the effects of global climate change.
Oh, goodness.
And it had to be canceled because the school was
Let's
no
all do
longer
this
in
by
session.
Zoom from our canoes.
I often, if you look at Hebrew scriptures, the prophets are sometimes told, you're going to go to a people that do not see and do not listen.
Right.
And sometimes I think the climate scientists must feel a bit like, Isaiah and Jeremiah. They keep, and this comes from someone who was something of a skeptic himself in the first 10 years or so. It's like, yeah, evidence seems to be piling up. Let's wait on evidence. I think we got evidence, which is not, again, one of the complications is this still probably would have been a bad storm, if there had been 10 inches of rain instead of 20 or whatever.
Absolutely.
And you can't attribute necessarily any particular event to global warming, But there does seem to be a fairly clear trend. And, sometimes people do need just eyes to see and ears to hear.
Yeah. It's always best to do our part no matter what you believe to make our world a better place and our environment a better place for us to live in and for our children and continued generations to live in and to be in. So, all right, I'm going to drink to that. I don't know if I'm drinking for sadness or in, cheers and hopes to that and better living, but I have brought a Rockland's Farm wine today. We've been to Rockland's Farm. It's a Maryland wine in our county. I'm in Montgomery County, where we are practicing and where I live. And this is another one. We previously had the Montevideo, and this one is a farmhouse. And it's a beautiful, beautiful blend. It's not quite a rosé, so it's not the pink, but it's a very beautiful red. It's not a deep, dark red. It's a light red, beautiful, wonderful wine. Highly recommend the winery. We'll put a link to it in the description below, but that's what I have. Chelsea, what do you have today?
I'm over here with some caffeine, so I have a good old-fashioned Coca-Cola.
All right. Now, Dr. Vile, water. I was going to see if we were going to have
early for Pepsi for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are we having the Pepsi versus Coke race? But okay, water and Coke. Well, I'm drinking. So cheers, everybody, and happy hour to whoever's out there. Let's talk about Diddy. And for that, I probably need this whole bottle of wine. All right, so we're going to do a very brief recap of some facts. If you want some more, please go back to our prior video. We will drop that at the end where you can hit over into that video if you want. We'll also put it in the description with a link to that video. But Chelsea, give us a quick recap for those who don't know and those who need a refresher of what are the basics of his charges, what's happening with him.
Where do I start? Hold on. Let me collect myself for those who are not watching and only listening, because this story is all alleged. Well, we'll start there. This is all alleged. However, essentially that he has been a sex trafficker, for lack of better word, sexual crimes, trafficking crimes, drug crimes. It's a pretty intense story. And that is what he's been indicted on. And now he has a huge legal team, and we're going to see how this plays out, right?
Yeah, those are some good basics. It seems like for decades alleged in this indictment, they've actually, like with Trump and Georgia's charges, they're claiming RICO, right? Racketeering.
He's been like the big
corrupt
human trafficking boss for decades, apparently.
Exactly. So what they're doing is, for those of you who don't know RICO, with this racketeering law, they're different in different states, and there's the federal ones. And this is a federal indictment. So the RICO laws, they were set up, I believe, originally for mafia-related offenses, where there's this corrupt organization, right? Corrupt organization who has a person or set of persons at the top who are organizing, at the beginning it was drugs, prostitution, gambling, that sort of thing, that get into illegal acts that are corrupting society, corrupting the youth, corrupting the families, corrupting the towns. And in this particular case, they're essentially saying Diddy's acting like this mob boss, where he's conspired and set up this organization that is trafficking.
Yeah.
Juveniles.
Everything.
Everything. Yeah. Females, males, where they're doing these parties. What was the term for the party?
It was the freak something party.
Freak off.
There we go.
Freak off parties. I can hardly describe them. Look them up if you really want to, but they're really disturbing allegations of sexual, escapades and orgies that seem to last for days.
Many involving minors, right?
Many involving minors against their will.
With a lot of adults who had been drugged. And apparently, what's being alleged is there's video of all of it.
Which, if you got to have evidence, I mean, video evidence is really hard to contradict. I'll tell a story, a quick little story, a legal trial story, to tell you the effect of video evidence, if we don't already know. I was watching a trial. This is when I was interning at a public defender's office in Virginia. And there was this great attorney who was doing one of the best defenses I'd ever seen of a robbery, an armed robbery of like a convenience store, right? And they went through DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence of whose was on the counter and whose wasn't, and could they really match this, or were they all smudges? And he was at the store multiple times, and the store clerk didn't really have a great identification, and it would have been a perfect defense. And the judge even says it, but there was video, right? And the guy wasn't wearing a mask. And the client was like, no, that's not me. That's not me. That's somebody who looks like me, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll never forget, the judge was great. He's like, well, Miss Attorney, at the end, this is, I love your case. You had compelling points and arguments. I really agree about the fingerprint evidence and this evidence and that evidence. But I'm looking right at the guy on the video. So he was convicted because there's the video, and he was like, that's the guy. I see him. So that is the strongest.
So on a related note, if anyone has seen the preview to the new Matlock series.
Oh, yes, with Kathy Bates.
Yes. There's a very interesting place where she says something. It's a 20, 30-year-old case. She says, well, what if there was a recording or a video? And he said, well, in a case like that, I'd have to take it. And knowing that nobody at the time was doing videos, only she then pulls out a 911 call that they did, and whether that could have happened or not, I'm not sure, but it was the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it truly is the best evidence out there. And I was doing a defense recently of an assault charge, and my client was actually innocent because we were able to show he had videos, and we had 3 different views of what was happening. It's like, no, my guy didn't do it. He was the one attacked. So it is really striking evidence, and with such strong evidence of decades of this. Let's get into the bond. So the judge has denied him. I mean, it's not even set at $1 million, $10 million. It's been no bond at all, 0 bond. There have been 2 hearings. So there was the first review of bond and a second, which is not uncommon. There are multiple times, especially me as a defense attorney, where I will say, there wasn't enough evidence at the first one. I have new additional evidence to give the court more confidence in setting a bond. Let's bring these people in to testify. But this is not a trial. Chelsea, what is this, and how does it relate in this legal structure?
Oh, I love this. And what is interesting, I don't know, that they attempted to make a deal with his bond. They were like, we'll turn over the passport. They're trying to work with the prosecutor to sort of come up with some package to present to the judge to see if they can, agree to something. And that did not. But the real question when it comes to bail or bond, like this is not a trial, there's only 2 things that matter. Are you a flight risk, and are you a danger to the community? Is really the only thing you're supposed to be considering here.
Yeah, that's it. Those are the only 2. And Dr. Vile, how hard is it normally to prove that they're a flight risk or a danger? What are the considerations?
Let me approach it from a different standpoint. So this is an 8th and probably 14th Amendment case because it's probably at the state level maybe at the state level. 8th Amendment says excessive bail shall not be required, but it doesn't guarantee bail.
Right.
Because there are some cases where no bail would be sufficient to assure the security of the public or, again, to avoid the chance of flight. Now, someone like him would probably be visible. I mean, he would certainly have enough money to try to leave the country, but his visibility in the media would be such that I don't know that he would be a terrible flight risk. But if any of these allegations are true, particularly those involving involuntary acts,
violent crime,
he is a literal danger to, it would be the equivalent of letting a mass murderer out, hoping that he doesn't murder again.
Or a child predator.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also one of those things that until it's been proven in a trial, it is innocent until proven guilty. And I think that's what makes bail and bond hearings some of the most fascinating ways that our legal system works, because there has to be this, like, talk about the scales of justice all the time, that you're not convicted until you're convicted, but we also have to weigh the risk to the community and the risk that a trial would never proceed because you're able to get your passport and jump ship.
Absolutely.
There's another interesting connection. The Eighth Amendment prohibits both excessive bail or excessive fines. And, one thing about fines that is sometimes discussed, the millionaire gets the same traffic ticket as the person who's making minimum wage. And I have seen proposals that if you're a millionaire and you're speeding, you ought to be charged a lot more to have an proportionate deterrent effect.
Yeah, and that's a huge movement through many states. In Virginia, as I've been practicing for almost 2 decades now, there's been a large groundswelling of, in setting $1,000 bond for someone making $100,000 is much different from setting what we would classify as a low bond of $1,000 for someone who doesn't even, who's on Social Security or on welfare or food stamps. And so there is this disproportion. And I think in one of the considerations that the judge is having for Diddy, it's like, well, even if I set $1 million bond, which would normally be cost prohibitive and act like a no bond ruling, in his case, you pay 1/10 to the bondsman, you pay $100,000. How is this prohibitive for him? And it's not. So what amount in the world could a judge set that would guarantee that he couldn't just toss some money down and go leave and flee to Ecuador, which doesn't have an extradition treaty?
So Chelsea raised 2 issues, and I wonder if there's a third, and I'm asking as a non-lawyer. But I wonder if part of this is that the evidence seems so massive that, yes, there is still a legal presumption of innocence, but it's not just one. He's literally, as I understand it, been recently sued by over 100 people or so.
Oh, it's been many people. Now, of course, some have settled out of court.
And they've done 1 or 2 searches of, I believe, both of his homes. So one wonders if that doesn't, in some, we used to have this argument about the exclusionary rule.
Yes.
That, it serves a good exclusionary rule, of course, prohibiting the introduction of illegally obtained evidence, and it serves a deterrent purpose. But sometimes it seems to have a disproportionate, it's one thing to exclude a marijuana cigarette that you've gotten illegally. It's another if you've discovered a body that's bullet-ridden.
Right, or child pornography.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is much more similar to a child pornography type of case, where in those cases as a prosecutor, when I was handling those cases in Virginia, it was, how do you protect, if you let this person out, how do you guarantee he's not going to find another computer and go back to the same searches, or she, the gender neutral? How do you protect these children in the community, even if it's the visual rather than in person, from these pornography rings, from a predator, from a murderer, from these other types of abuse? You can't guarantee the protection. This guy has how much money? He has how many people and access to planes and
because I was going to say that's the flight risk part for Diddy, I think. Like you're saying, Dr. Bell, there is a weird visibility thing, but I especially think about when we have these cases that have RICO charges, it's because they have networks of people who have strings to pull.
Organization.
Right? Like that is the whole premise of it. And so I think that
wealth is a moral hazard. People don't.
Oh, I love that. Can we get that printed somewhere?
Well, we glorify those somewhat right. Those who are self-made men and women and whatever, and realize the ingenuity or whatever. But the more money you have, the more possibilities you have for doing wrong and getting by with it.
Right. And this is, I want to hit the point that each of you has raised is this innocence issue, but the evidence that's there. And I will say in the bond hearings, it is relevant, highly relevant, for the judge to hear a proffer of the evidence. Okay. And this is not a proof hearing. It's not saying, this is absolutely certain, but the charges were made with probable cause. So at least to bring an arrest warrant or to bring an indictment, depending on which one you're using, in this case, a grand jury has found probable cause for these charges. So what the prosecutor is able to do is say, look, Judge, I know there's not been, a finding on guilt, but there's at least probable cause that he's committed the following offenses. And here are the relevant facts. And you proffer it. You give them not a hypothetical, because it's not a hypothetical, but you say, we believe the evidence is going to show this. The search warrant uncovered XYZ. We have videos. That's exactly what I would say as a prosecutor. In this case, we have video. And not just we have it, but here's what the videos show. And I have my police officer over here who's ready and willing to testify and take the stand and tell you under oath what they saw and what they found. And that alone is concerning enough about his risk to the community. His visibility, his wealth, his organization, his influence is enough of a concern that if he can run this trafficking ring, then why can't he traffic himself right out of here? These two issues are huge. So let me bring up a question to the both of you and jump right in when whoever, you can fight over it. Let's compare, and not in charges, okay? So this is not a comparison of sex trafficking charges. No. So these are different charges, different people, but public figures, okay? So the comparison is public figurehood and wealth. That's the only comparison I'm making. Let's not be sued. This is not defamation. How does this compare to Trump?
Oh, I love this.
He's got... he doesn't have RICO innocence, or at least not federally. Now, he has RICO charges in Georgia. Okay, he's got racketeering charges in Georgia with an alleged organization of crime. Yeah. Okay, it's not sex trafficking. It's not kidnapping, but it's a serious offense. It's the same type of offense, and he's been charged in New York and DC and Florida and Georgia. So how is he out on bond, running around the entire country as best as he please? Why is that different? Why did he get a bond in any and all of these cases and Diddy didn't?
I think I have a lot of thoughts about this. Obviously, I've been waiting to talk about this. I think wealth-wise and sort of like recognizable public figure-wise, we could probably say that they are about the same level. I mean, we could, tussle over it, but I think that is fair to say. I think what is different, even though the charges shouldn't count, I think if you are trying to make a danger to the community argument, we're in danger that he's going to falsify business records doesn't really hit the same as like we're in danger of someone trafficking human beings. So I think that's like a harder argument to make. Although, because we are in an election cycle, you can make the argument that this is the most dangerous time for someone to falsify business records in the hopes of, stealing the election. This is prime time for that. But I think it just doesn't really hit the same. And because we have a former president, Secret Service always knows where he is, right? So Diddy has enough money to be anonymous. Trump could never make himself anonymous again.
Right, because we have the feds following him for his own protection, allegedly.
That's true.
If he weren't so orange.
We might wonder.
Pay for some good prosthetics, maybe.
Yeah, if he weren't so visible in color scheme, maybe he would be more invisible.
Without a spray tan, I might not recognize him. Honestly, it might really change the game.
Well, and as sad and funny as this is, my thought as his attorney is I would have argued, again, forgive me, but I would have argued, well, he doesn't want to go anywhere because he wants to be president. So why would he flee? Why would he not show up? He's your least flight risk. in the entire country because he wants to be in the country. He wants to lead the country. Why would he go anywhere but here? So
That's such a good point. You should be a lawyer.
Thanks, Chelsea.
I hear there's some courses you can take to pass the bar.
I hear there are too by people who should be attorneys. That's cute. Thank you. The other thing, now here, let me play devil's advocate. So that's for a defense argument for Trump, but let me play a prosecution argument. And this is more of, I'm going to play devil's advocate for Democrats, okay? And I'm not saying this is the right one, but again, devil's advocate on each side is, on the other side, it's like, well, he's a risk to democracy. If anything, he's not just a risk to a couple of people. He's a risk to the entire United States.
Fundamental fabric of our democracy. Right. This is a justice and equality argument. Yes.
Right. And as amid the broader idea of this, right, this broader argument, I think it would have been fair, not that it worked or is the best argument, but I think a fair argument on the other side, on the prosecution side, would be, look, let's go to his ability to influence. And Jack Smith and a lot of the different attorneys in all four jurisdictions argued this point is in looking at the overall community effect. He's very influential. His words have meaning and effect. And especially Jack Smith's case for D.C., it's like we're looking at even the January 6th incident, riots, depending on which side you want to take. And if he has the ability to influence that, shouldn't we be most concerned about civil outbreak, civil unrest, rioting? Isn't that a bigger concern for the community? What do you two think about that argument?
I would say the way to make him more influential would be to make a martyr of him. And there is,
love it.
Here it's, the ancient story of the Chinese, the children who want to show up the wise man. And so they bring a bird in their hands and they say, is this bird dead or alive? And if he says alive, then they kill it. If they say dead, they kill it. So he says, the answer is in your hands. And that's pretty much what we have here. I mean,
Schrodinger's
there are
martyr.
limits to what prosecutors can do.
Yes.
And you could actually make a martyr figure of him. The people have a choice as to whether to reelect or not reelect someone who seems to be challenging the democratic process. And that doesn't mean it's the only check that we have, but there's always concern, particularly among political scientists, about what we call, and commentators, what we call October surprises. Right now we have a very even election, or we seem to have.
Right.
It's going to center on 7 to 9, key states, all of which, 1 to 3 points apart. But already in October, we've had a debate, which I don't think moved the needle a lot, but I think,
for the vice presidential
had the possibility. Vice presidential debate. We've had Israel and, Iran's attack on Israel and everything going on there.
Right.
We have a dock worker strike. And you add on, what would happen if you put a person running for president in prison and refuse to give him bond? That may have unintended consequences. It'd probably lead to greater civil unrest than not.
Right. And at this point, quite frankly, as a defense attorney for Trump, I would be saying, not that he has bond already. He's been let out for all of them. But if he were considered for bond again, my other argument would be risk to the community. He's the one at risk from the community based on the 2 assassination attempts. So turning that on its head. And on a quick light note, if any of this can be light, my favorite cartoon regarding bond, Chelsea, you at least might have seen it.
Okay, I don't know.
The Penguins? Have you seen this?
No.
It's got a guy,
Flight risk,
a guy representing a penguin, and he says, "Your Honor, my client is at no risk of flight."
Yeah, but people might not recognize him, right? It would take fellow penguins to know which penguin was which.
Right. So anyway, that's my summary of Bond. Okay, so we do have more to talk about. Let's go to this Missouri issue. This is definitely not light in the least. Chelsea, I know this is one of the topics close to your heart. Talk to us about what happened in Missouri with this execution. What are we looking at?
Okay, I'll give you sort of the high and lows of what we're talking about. And everyone is going to be shocked and surprised. I actually have notes. I actually wrote things down for the first time. Because I am so upset about this because I'm so upset. Okay. So we have Marcellus Williams, who was executed on September 24th in Missouri, which in my personal opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, shouldn't have happened, that this execution should not have happened. Now, that is not the same as saying someone is innocent. Right. It is just saying that I don't think we should do things when we're not 100% sure. And in this particular case, he was convicted of the 1998 murder of Felicia Gale, who was a woman. She was a journalist who was murdered in her home. He was convicted of it in 2001. So this has been going on for a long time. We got to this point in 2015 and 2017, when both of the governors at the time, respectively, stayed the execution. And it's because there was new evidence that had come to light and was being tested. So there's this DNA evidence that did not match him. He was convicted on 2 eyewitness testimony, but none of the fingerprints, shoe prints, blood, nothing like science-y, right, or hard evidence could connect him, but he was still convicted anyways. The 2 eyewitnesses, but it was they were witnesses. They were jailhouse informants, essentially, and they were each paid $10,000 because they collected the reward money after his conviction, which if you are incarcerated, $10,000 of reward money
that's a lot.
Might be worth saying someone confessed to you. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
You don't have to be incarcerated for that to be real money.
There's the levity.
Touché, there we go. And so this one particularly is so egregious because we had the victim's family, the prosecuting office. Obviously, it's not the same prosecutor, like it's 20 years later, right? But the prosecuting attorney's office filed a 63-page motion to vacate the conviction. And I think I've talked in circle a little bit, but the DNA evidence had excluded him, but then it came back and said the DNA that was on the knife was the DA's investigator and the prosecuting attorney's DNA. So they thought it was exactly. So what they had thought in these hearings, because it's been going on and on and on, was that, we have DNA evidence that excludes him. And then they got to the point, because they had tested, did it match, right? Did this DNA match? And it didn't, so it excluded him. Then they continued the testing, and it was all contaminated. So the judges denied.
That's reasonable doubt.
You would think, but if you've already been convicted, you and I know that the standard to overturn that conviction is it reasonable doubt anymore? Do we have like this evidence that could prove actual innocence? And because the DNA on the murder weapon was contaminated, that's not possible.
It's not enough.
It was not enough. And so even with, again, the victim's family said, we don't want him executed. Prosecuting attorney's office said, we don't want him executed. And they'd come up with a deal too, because this is the wildest part. And the judge struck that would not accept this. They came up with a deal where he would Alford plea, which we've talked about in the past like 2 or 3 episodes, actually, to the crime, and that they would commute his sentence to life without parole, just getting rid of the execution. That was denied by the courts, and the governor refused to stay the execution. So that is why I'm upset about this case.
And that's hard to hear. Dr. Vile, is there anything constitutionally, whether state or federal, our own, country's constitution, that could, is there some provision to stop this from happening with all of this? I mean, the 63-page memo, why could it still go forward? Long pause.
What's unique about the death penalty is irrevocability. Now, in a sense, it's not completely unique. If they stick you in jail for 20 years for a crime that you didn't commit, you've lost those 20 years of interacting with your family and earning an income and whatever. But you can at least be perhaps monetarily compensated, as you will sometimes see,
right.
False conviction. What's disturbing about this case is if you favor the death penalty, the one thing that's going to work against imposition of the death penalty is if you can find cases where we know someone was executed who was guilty. Who was innocent.
Not. Right.
And I think much of this is in dispute. I think there are some cases that we can go back now and find that they were, but a lot of times you still don't know. But if there's even the shadow of a doubt, one wants to be to go back to the constitutional issue, of course, is there's two things: due process. And what we've done is we've sort of front-loaded due process on the original trial and the appeals versus the new evidence. But then the other is cruel and unusual punishment. Frankly, you could probably make a pretty good argument that being on death row and twice getting up to near the day of the execution before you're given another extension, that after a while that becomes cruel and unusual. The other thing, of course, is that the two primary motives for death penalty would be deterrence.
Right.
And the other is just sort of absolute justice. But absolute justice, you need to make sure there was an absolute crime. In terms of deterrence, how deterrent is it? He's been in jail 20 or 30 years.
Since 2001. Yeah.
Yeah. So, over 20 years.
Girl math.
Right.
We're in something of a dilemma here, which is that to serve as a deterrent, crime punishments need to be relatively coincidental with the crime. And if you give due process, that makes it almost impossible. Yeah. And so we're in just one of these dilemmas where, even people who might, in theory, favor the death penalty don't think probably that it works that well. But if there's anything that's going to undermine it, it's evidence that we've actually executed people that we should not have, that we're not murderers.
Yeah, and there's is it Proverbs, the actual book of Proverbs in the Bible is better to have how many, guilty people go free?
I don't think it is. I think
Proverbs,
it comes
is it
from,
just someone
from
else?
Brandeis and several others, but
okay.
It would make a nice little search.
It feels
Some
biblical.
say better that 10 innocent people go free than that one guilty be punished.
Person.
Others say it's 100. Others say it's 1,000.
Yeah. Right. Backwards. 10 guilty people go free than one innocent man be punished, right?
So I think what's frustrating here, is that, now to be clear, nobody's going to be shocked by this. I think there are some crimes that people deserve to die for. That if you do it, you don't need to be here. However, I don't really believe in big government, so I don't think the government should ever have the power to do it. Is my argument against the death penalty? I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm just saying I don't particularly want the state making that call. However, in this case, what is so crazy about it is that you have to have new evidence to overturn a conviction. So I understand why the judge made the choice that he did, because there was no new evidence. There was no new evidence to present
for the
to the
legal
court.
standard, right?
And that is technically the rule, right? You have to have something new to overturn the conviction. Now, the other thing is, they made that there were constitutional violations, the jury selection seemed really racially biased. And also ineffective assistance of counsel. None of those things the judge sort of bought, even though the prosecution wrote a 63-page motion.
Right. And it does seem in this particular case with the prosecution stepping in so strongly and heavily to say, if even they are asking, and they're the ones who prosecuted this man, if they're even asking for some kind of commutation, why wouldn't we have, just the human decency to say
the reason is politics, right?
Yes.
People love to demonstrate that they're tough on crime.
It's an election year.
And yes, I mean, I haven't followed this case as closely, I think, as the two of you have, but my understanding is that at least one or more of the politicians think that they're going to benefit by having this guy. That, I don't know that I want to name the president because it's been so long since I remember hearing this, but there was a Democrat who ran for president on sort of a law and order platform. And when he was governor, a person was executed who clearly had diminished mental capacity. When they gave him his last meal, if I remember correctly, he asked to put some aside for later. And, he profited politically from this, but it's like, how can you live with yourself, after you've done something like that?
Right.
Yeah. And I think and that's the thing. I understand. I might not agree with why the judge here made the call, but he has at least some standard that he's saying, I have to follow these rules. The governor, on the other hand, could have just made the call
for whatever reason they wanted
and stay the execution because it was a Monday. You know what I mean? He could have just made it and he didn't have to sort of work that. And it's that human thing of like, how could you not?
And that's the same reason that people do, where the new president can, what's the word I'm looking for and I can't find it?
Clemency.
Yes, thank you. Can grant clemency. Is you can excuse how many people's crimes for whatever reason you want to, even because they're a buddy or a friend or a family member. So you're right. In this instance, the governor had that the judge had the legal standard. The governor had whatever they drank, that morning for coffee. Did it taste good? Well, okay, then they get the day. They get
the political move, just like
sentence.
in the case with the diminished capacity that Dr. Weil was talking about. It's just a political call. It's just a personal decision, and to choose not to do it says a lot to me. I'm sure there are people in his constituency who are like psyched about it, but it couldn't be me.
And so let me give you a story. And Chelsea, I know you and I are going to be talking about this one on one of the Law Unscripted podcasts, so I don't want to give too much away about it. But it goes directly into this. So let me give you an example of one that went the opposite way. And this is a case in Virginia of Roger Coleman back in 1982 in Grundy, Virginia. One of my prior professors and mock trial coaches in law school at William and Mary actually wrote a book called May God Have Mercy. And it was about this case. And he wrote it as a defense attorney. He wasn't his defense attorney, but as a defense attorney from his viewpoint of the whole book is May God Have Mercy because we don't believe there was enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Here were the flaws in the defense. Here were the flaws in the prosecution. Here's why the case should be revisited. And there was this huge hubbub about the Innocence Project should step in and take the case, and DNA should have been tested because there was DNA. And at the time, back in the 80s, nobody tested it. We don't have it. And there was this big cry of don't execute him, at least until we test the DNA. The DNA is going to prove he was innocent. You're executing a guilty man. And I remember reading this book going, oh my gosh, we can't execute this guilty man, because when I was reading it in the early 2000s, it was, they're going to execute a guilty man. And bless his heart, the author, John Tucker, passed away before there was a resolution of the case and before the execution. And in a lot of ways, I think I'm glad he did, because Mr. Coleman was executed, it was oh my gosh, we've killed an innocent man. And it was really tragic. It was hard to watch. I mean, I had to turn it off. I had read this book and I was like, oh my goodness. And then a couple of years later, I don't know who scraped it together, whether it was the Innocence Project or somebody else who just gave a benefited gift of let's test the DNA. And slightly under the cover of all the news one day, and like page 7 of the newspaper, there was a story of DNA tested and it was his, proven guilty. And, it was tucked away. But that's the opposite story.
Yeah.
There was,
but in this one, I don't know.
Proof that
I don't know if Marcellus Williams did this. I don't know. But if we can't say, oh, he did it, maybe we don't kill. Hey, I know it's a crazy talk, y'all. Maybe we just don't execute people if we're not sure. I don't think that's like an unreasonable thing to ask.
Right.
And again, I don't know. I don't know if he did it or not. But I think either way,
and again,
that is a tragedy.
If you favor the death penalty, the last thing you want is it to be imposed improperly.
Correct.
And it's going to erode support for a death penalty if, in these kind of cases, it proceeds without, you're never going to get, I hear that there's nobody in prison who claims to be guilty.
They're all innocent, don't you know?
Right.
I mean,
every single one.
We learned this from Shawshank Redemption, y'all.
Yes. I don't think I had that in my constitutional law course. But
And speaking of which, Dr. Weil, I'm afraid I passed over who you were at the beginning, but so everyone who can, I said your name, but for those who don't know, he is our constitutional expert. Dr. Weil is the Dean of the Honors College at Middle Tennessee State University, and he is an expert on the Constitution, constitutional law, the amending process, and a political scientist. So that's where he's giving this much gravitas to our show here with all of his wonderful constitutional opinions. All right, so let's move on to our third topic. We're getting into the smaller topics to wrap this up for today. But let's talk about Jack Smith, because we have, of the Trump cases, Jack Smith is on 2. And we're going to focus on the one that's still going, because if you all recall from our prior episodes and what's been happening, the Florida case was dismissed by that judge. So currently it's on appeal for the fact that it was dismissed. So Prosecutor Smith has appealed that. And currently then the D.C. case, though, has picked up movement. And we are in civil case, we would call it litigation phase, where you're actually in trial posture. You're moving through the case in court. In criminal law, we normally call it the discovery process, where you're preparing for trial. The prosecution has a duty to provide specific evidence to the defense for them to see it before trial. Most states, this is a very low requirement. This is usually, you must provide exculpatory evidence. So any evidence this is such a small requirement. Any evidence which may have a tendency to show innocence or doubt on the part of the defense, and usually the defendant's statements and the defendant's criminal record. These have to be turned over in most, if not all, states and federal jurisdictions. Some states have additional requirements. Some jurisdictions have their own, I'll just have an open file policy. But in this case, it sounds like a substantial amount of documents are in this D.C. case for obstruction of the election, election interference. And it sounds like Jack Smith wants to put it all in public, not just turn it over to the defense. Dr. Weil, is that allowed?
Well, the judge is going to decide. Again, this could be what's fascinating. This could be one of these October surprises were it to come out. Remember, very similar to in the campaign with Hillary Clinton.
Oh, right. That was in October,
you had the FBI director, we're going to reopen it or not reopen it, whatever. But what's fascinating about this, and I was talking to a colleague just in the last day or two, we've already had an impeachment hearing that largely centered on this. We have heard lots and lots of testimony. And what I find surprising is apparently Jack Smith has quite a bit of additional evidence that we didn't hear during during what weeks of
Congressional hearings. Wow.
And so, I mean, I really want to know what it is.
I do too.
And, but,
That's a really
could very well sway the election. Now, maybe it ought to. I mean, if there's something even more untoward or more damning than we know, then perhaps we should know that before we cast our votes. On the other hand, if it turns out to be, just a lot more ambiguity that just calls attention to something that we already know about, I can see a judge saying, just for the sake of not appearing to have the judiciary interfere with an election, there's no particular need to have it now rather than later.
Well, and I will say, as a prosecutor, former prosecutor in Virginia, I don't think I ever turned over anything publicly until the actual trial, when the trial itself was public. And I was like, if you want to know it, show up and take notes, right? If you're a news reporter, show up and take notes of what's publicly said in court. But we were not in the habit. I truly can't remember a time where we publicly turned over information. We always turned it over to the defense. But we never turned it over publicly. And a lot of defense attorneys are saying, well, you should turn over all of your evidence rather than just these three limited things, because there's not only an October surprise, but court surprises, right? There's so many times as defense attorneys where you're like, oh my God, I didn't know that was going to come out of the mouth of this witness. I didn't even know who that witness was. And you don't have to. Under the law, you don't have to have that information. You only have to have the defendant's statements, the criminal record, and any exculpatory information. Now, some of the exculpatory information is broad, like a witness's bias, a witness's criminal record. If it's a prosecution witness who is a jailhouse informant, you got to tell them about they're the jailhouse informant. So there's it's more broad than I'm saying, but it is still extremely limited. So I think Trump's team is doing absolutely what they should be doing, of saying, okay, give it to us, but this shouldn't be made public. But as Jack Smith, what I would be saying is, okay, I won't make it public. But if you make anything public that I give you, I'll make all the rest of it public. That's what I would want to do as, gamesmanship on both sides. And
so maybe I need some clarification. Does the defense have the evidence or they don't?
I don't know that they have it yet. And honestly, I haven't. I know that there's the scheduling conference was earlier in September, and there was a deadline for the discovery to have been produced to the defense. But as of the taping of this show, I am not certain whether it has been produced or not. But I know it has not been made public as
if the defense has it, then clearly they must think it's damning if they're trying to stop it from public disclosure.
I would think there's enough out there to be concerned about.
Right.
And even if it's just the interpretation that the public could have without all of the evidence, that the assumptions they could make. As Trump, I would not want it out in the public now. I'd say, how many other cases, and it's his tactic, right, that he's had with all these other trials, delay, so all of this can be passed to the end of the election. After the election, Hillary Clinton, like you're saying, it's a great comparison, is October, all this came out, and there's, all of a sudden we think Hillary Clinton's a criminal, and guess what? She loses. And Trump is saying, she's a criminal. We don't want a criminal in office. So if all of that evidence came out into the public and there wasn't a trial, there wasn't an actual indictment, she wasn't involved in the legal process, I can see her saying, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Let's put it all out there. But you're right. This is an extremely crucial time in politics for this election. So that's where we are with Jack Smith. So stay tuned with us. We are going to definitely talk about whether the evidence is published to the public by either side, what the judge's decision is and why, and what the reasoning is that's said. So stay tuned with us on that. Let's do some final election updates. I know we've just recently watched the vice presidential debate. None of us has talked with each other about it because I wanted it to be a surprise even to ourselves. So you're getting our genuine, real, immediate reactions to each other's comments on this. Chelsea, you have so much fun with these things. I've got to bring you in first. Chelsea's our little Spitfire here, who brings a lot of entertainment and excitement to this show, and the vivid, real person here. So Chelsea,
Yes.
what are your reactions to the vice presidential debate?
Okay, I will tell you first, shock. Because I'd made some predictions. I watched it with my mom and my little brother, and I had made some predictions about how I thought it was going to go. Well, I will not be playing the lottery anytime soon because my luck was not quite accurate. We've talked about this in the other episodes. To put it lightly, JD Vance just gives me the ick. Like, he just gives me the ick. So that was kind of what I was expecting going into the debate. But I also, and this is kind of, in my opinion, how it played out, was that, but this is his arena. Because we have all these videos that have been, since we've had our VP picks announced, we sort of see, Coach Wall team, and all of these sort of like fun videos that seems like he has a personality. But in JD Vance, a lot of his like crowd work is not crowd work, not like he's a comedian, but like his crowd interactions seem strange. He gives me the ick. And so that's kind of what I was expecting going in. In my opinion, everyone's not going to like this. This might be the first time people are going to get real mad at me. I think JD Vance wiped the floor. He won by far. Wow. And I don't like him. I really, 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 really don't like him. And I think he won by a landslide.
Fascinating. Okay.
Which I know, I don't think anybody saw that coming. I just think, especially in comparison, I mean, he sounds like a debate bro, right? He does the same like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro type of structure of his answers. But this was his arena, and that was clear, in my opinion.
I love it. Okay, Dr. Vile, what's your opinion?
So I actually saw, no, I can't verify this, but I had a headline that I was thinking of writing something about, and I saw the headline in a story, I believe, in the Washington Post. It wasn't the actual headline, but it was the lead into it. And it is that J.D. Vance is no Mike Pence. So to put this in context, one of the most famous debates, lines in a vice presidential debate, was Lloyd Bentsen turning, Dan Quayle had referenced John Kennedy, and Lloyd Bentsen said, I knew John Kennedy, I was a friend of John Kennedy, and you're no John Kennedy. So I would agree. I don't think it was a complete wipeout, but I would agree that Vance had the edge, and that's not really unexpected. Right. I mean, he's a graduate of Yale Law School. He wrote a best-selling book. You would expect him to be fairly articulate, although at one point he did fail to use the subjunctive, which bothered me greatly.
Our grammar czar here.
I love that.
But the debate, the line that I think is going to be the most quoted in the debate, which might be more important than who won, was Vance's failure to say who had won, what he would have done in the 2020 election. And this is a lawyer. I mean, a Yale-educated lawyer who is unwilling to say whether he would have certified or not certified the election of Joe Biden, who clearly won.
Right.
And you can put all the other aside, and in my judgment, that is a major disqualification. And I say this as, I think we mentioned this last program. Mike Pence came to our campus fairly recently. He did, actually, his performance was somewhat similar here as to what these two debaters did. He tried to kill with kindness. He showed respect to people who answered questions. But on the one question that, in my judgment, was the most important, he got it right. No, I'm not going to certify or decertify an election that someone has legally won. And I do think this is where I think Walz's experience as a coach came in. And what I have tried to tell people is, put aside all the election, this and that, but you have 60 cases or so, all of which go against Trump. He clearly loses. You're on the field in a football game and you say, well, I know normally there's only 4 quarters in a game, but we were so close. We just need another quarter. Or, I know the rules say that, we should only get 3 points for that last field goal, but I really think we ought to get 6. It's the rules of the game. And those adherence to the rules of the game, if you don't do that, you don't have a constitution. You can have a written, Russia had a wonderful written constitution for many years. They just never paid any attention.
They never followed it, right?
Right. And, these people need to be, either way, they need to be committed, and Kamala Harris, right, is going to be the one opening the votes. Thank goodness that it's going to, I'm confident that if she loses, that she's going to announce the other person as the winner.
Absolutely.
I'm not confident that if J.D. Vance were the one opening the ballots, that he would necessarily try to award it to the winner. And so, yes, one was more polished than the other. I thought they both came across, frankly, as affable.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed.
I think it helped Vance more because, as you say, his public, he's had very high negatives, and it helped him and it helped Trump in the sense that, well, Trump can't be such an ogre if he, has such a nice man here running with him. And that's sort of what he did with Pence. I can't be all that bad here. Here's this good Christian guy with him. So in terms of, yes, Vance was a better debater, but what is going to be the primary? Now, there was one time where Walsh just really screwed up, which was the Tiananmen Square thing. He just said, I got it wrong. It was the same year. I got a little confused.
He was close to saying it, but he didn't say it.
Yeah, no. He'd let it go on. If he had just started with that would have been fine. Okay.
Yeah.
You're 60-year-old or however. Yeah. We sometimes have little.
Yeah.
But but I think, the main thing to say is it probably won't make any difference.
No.
Right. It's the president and the presidential debates.
We had a discussion yesterday about this, that in the debate between Pence and Harris, remember what got the most attention?
I don't even remember the debates. That's how little they mattered to me.
Well, the most memorable moment was when a fly landed on Pence's white hair.
Yes.
And he was unflappable. He didn't do anything about it. He didn't swat it or whatever.
Right.
But the fly got as much attention as the two candidates did.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
in a sense, that's a successful debate. The last thing a vice president wants to do is to have one of these awful moments that's just repeated over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me give my opinion.
Let's hear the drum roll. What does Virginia think?
I have bits of both of your opinions, and then I have something else to add. And here's where we're going to get into a little bit more of my character, other than just more of a news host and legal idealist. and legal informant for people. So Chelsea, I agree. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I guess in a good way.
Yes. And I was agreed.
I literally told my husband before the debate, I said, I'm just waiting to see how many times I'm personally offended by J.D. Vance. as a woman,
is he going to just
as
do
a
the low
mother,
blows
as a
every time?
stepmother, all of these things that he's been saying that have been pulled out of the media from all these years before. I've been so personally offended by the cat lady statement, by the, mothers who can't be mothers and don't have a stake in it. You all know we've talked about this multiple times on the program, but I was really preparing for how many times was I going to be yelling at the TV if this is ridiculous? How dare you say that? And I shouldn't have been so surprised, but because of all of those prior statements, I was surprised at how unflappable, how calm, how reasonable he appeared. And then I was like, well, he went to Yale Law School. He clearly is experienced in trial work. He is clearly experienced in debate. He knows how to do this, and he clearly did, and he did a great job at it. I yelled at the TV a few times, but I yelled at both candidates and for both candidates because in my own training as a trial attorney, as a lawyer, I was saying the answer should be this. Don't say that, say this. And my husband would like, well, please be quiet. I'm trying to sleep. It's 11 o'clock on the Eastern Shore. And so we've got...
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't surprised, but I will say this in my other takeaway from it. I was pleased to see it in, his education's coming through, his knowledge is coming through. He actually does seem to be nice. This is a shocker to me. He does seem more reasonable. But I had to look at it and say, well, of these two candidates, Waltz didn't do as great a job in the debate. So in the technicalities and the easy responses that flowed off the tongue. But when I look at it in the end, who did I think was the same person that I've been seeing all of these months before?
Absolutely.
And the person that was the same person was Waltz. J.D. Vance, I thought they picked a person out of the like the movie Dave, right?
Yeah.
Where they pick someone who looks just like the president who's in ICU and they put him up there and he's the president. Nobody knows any different. I was like, who's this guy playing Vance? They picked a great body double. He looks just like him. So that almost concerns me because this takes up a point that you made, Chelsea, of he knows how to play his audience. He knows his audience and he plays to the audience. He doesn't play himself. He plays to the audience. Which podcast was he on that he made those comments? Which interview was he on? Each audience, these other debates, these campaign, all of these campaign places that he's going, depending on where he goes and who with whom he's talking and speaking, he says different things.
And if it benefits him, he's I'm a never Trump guy who's now the VP pick for Trump, right?
Yes.
And yeah, Dr. Weil.
The one thing that Waltz didn't do that he needed is because they didn't really allow for fact checks. Mm-hmm. What Vance said about Trump's position on Obamacare.
Oh, it was just false.
I mean, and it wasn't, and they both made some misstatements.
Yes, they both did.
I ended up with the notion that if we just call this Trump care, he'd be perfectly satisfied with it. Yeah. But
just rename
something
it.
else, and this is odd, but it's something I pay attention to. I did not realize. So, do you know the denominational affiliations of the candidates?
Vance is Catholic, isn't he?
Vance is converted Catholic. And I thought, so Waltz made a statement about going to home is a place that you come to after you go to Mass on Christmas Eve or whatever. And I thought, I didn't know he was a Catholic, which would be very unusual to have two candidates. We've only had two Catholic presidents.
Right.
And then I did look it up. He calls himself a Minnesotan Lutheran. Okay. So close. I mean,
they're more similar in at least procedures.
But it reminds me that, Huey Long, the reputation he had is that he he would tell audiences that he would drive his, and I'm probably confusing which was which, but his Baptist parents to the church, and then he'd come back and take, to the Baptist church, and then he would come back with his parents and take them to the Catholic mass or whatever. He knew how to, and I don't know if how intentional that was or not, but I thought it was interesting that he threw in the mass, which,
that is
50 years ago, if you had done that, it would have raised some red flags.
Right. And so my final comment on the debates will be about, one of the things I was yelling at the TV as a trial attorney, as someone who is very experienced and taught and coached on how to do these debates and how to respond immediately, right? Thinking on your feet, responding to the question and the answer that have actually been said, not what you've been preparing for, but what was actually said. And there were so many times, and Vance played this very well. I didn't like it, but it's because I know better. But I respected what he was doing, which is Trump had a theme, right? His theme was all the aliens, the illegal aliens, right? And he went back to it. It was a fear-mongering tactic, but that was his tactic, okay? That was it. Vance's, if you picked up on it, his theme throughout the day was Kamala Harris didn't fix it. Yeah. Kamala Harris didn't do it, so why would she do it now?
President Kamala Harris.
Right. She hasn't done it. She hasn't done it. Why didn't she do it? She had all this opportunity to do it. And I just kept screaming at the TV of saying, Waltz, you have to say that's not her role. As an attorney from Yale Law School, don't you know the difference between the role of a senator and the congressperson and the role of a vice president? You're the congressman. Why aren't you doing anything about it? You have more of an influence on these laws and these rules and these policies than she did as the vice president. And I was just screaming at the television of Vance is trying to make out the vice president as a position that it's not. As if they're writing executive orders. No, that's the president who writes executive orders. Congress makes law.
If people go to the Well News, they will see an article of mine published a week or two ago with the title, "The Vice President is Not a Co-President." Now, they're closer than they used to be.
Right.
They tend to be given more authority. But in the end, and this was something that Pence, when he came to MTSU, made a point of, and I'm assuming that is true. He said that he always gave his counsel to the president, but once the president had decided, except I guess in the election thing, once the president, when it was a decision he legally had to make, then he would always publicly support it, or at least he would not oppose it.
Right. And that was the same thing. The other thing is with this part that you're talking about, Dr. Weil, of this January 6th certification, is I would have done the same thing as Waltz. Whatever your political view, as a debater, as a trial attorney, my response would be, okay, so again, as a Yale Law School graduate and as an attorney, an officer of the court and of the law, someone who is also supposed to uphold and protect the law and defend the Constitution, you're telling me you wouldn't actually follow its rules? So what other rules don't you want to follow?
He did come close, right? He said that is a damning non-answer.
Yes, and
that was the most on the offense that Walsh was during the night. And again, it may be that it's not always who wins the debate.
Right.
And of course, the other thing to remember is it's not so much what they said about themselves, it's how they reflected on the candidates who chose, that they're running with.
Yeah.
And that's a little harder to ascertain.
I agree.
Yeah. I think that, the not moving the needle either way, I think is true. And like you said, Virginia, I mean, I watched it as someone who really didn't like Vance. And I really do feel like he won. I feel like he did not look nervous. I feel like Waltz looked uncomfortable, nervous, out of place.
Stage.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So all of the presentation things just on their own, I think, weren't really great for him, but I do not trust him as far as I can throw him. Just because he's a good salesman doesn't mean I believe it, right? Like, I'm not buying it, but he was really good. His pitch was very, like, the kindness, the, like, very relaxed energy. It worked.
I liked the politics between the two in terms of, I liked the presentation of democracy, of we can hold a wonderful debate and have different opinions and talk and persuade people on the arguments. You know, I'll respect you and I'll support you. That was so much of a better, like, personally, a more calming and comforting and encouraging meeting of two minds versus the venom and everything else. But that's clearly not what's much more divisive than that. So, all right. So stay tuned with us. This was a little bit longer. You could have zipped through our politics or whatever, but we had to at least get opinions out there. We'd love to hear what your opinions were. We're not saying that any of ours are correct or yours are correct. It's an opinion, right, of what we thought about the two candidates and how they did. Feel free to drop those in there. Stay tuned with us for the upcoming weeks with regard to elections, what these October surprises are going to be, legally, which ones are more significant, what's happening in the Trump trials as this goes on, and any other crazy legal thing that happens, because we do talk about the hottest legal topics of the week. Stay tuned with us over the next few weeks. Don't forget to check out thelawunscripted.com for your law school needs regarding the 8 core subjects. Also, check out the Law Unscripted podcast, where we break some of these legal concepts down in specific individual shows. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.